Hey, sisters and brothers, welcome to week 26 of Read Through the Bible in 2 years. In our Old Testament readings, we continue with the reading of the book of Deuteronomy. And the book of Deuteronomy is the name Deuteronomy itself means the second law, or a review of what this law of God is. And it sets itself up by this idea that old Moses, now 120 years old, he has led his people for the last 40 years out of slavery in Egypt to Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb, or depending on which version that you read. And there he received the law of God from God's own lips, and he communicated this law now to God's people. These people now have wandered in this wilderness for 40 years to teach them that this God is powerful enough to give them everything that they need, because in these 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, every drop of water, every morsel of food has come directly from God. And now they are ready to enter into the promised land, this land that God promised their ancestors many, many hundred years before. And so Moses climbs up on this rock, and the promised land is behind him, and he's facing his people now. They're on the border of this promised land. They're on the shores of the Jordan River, ready to take possession. And Moses tells his people, he says, remember what God has done for you. And then Moses cautions his people not to be disobedient. Moses warns his people to always follow God's law. And then this Deuteronomy is the retelling of this God's law. What are the high points that they need to remember at all times? And so the fifth chapter of Deuteronomy, which is part of your reading this week, will be a retelling of the Ten Commandments. Even though we've heard it again, we heard it before in Exodus chapter 20, and you might want to compare the two. It is the second telling of this law. And then as part of this, we hear this great commandment that Moses tells his people, something that we hear in the New Testament. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your might. Do not forget. Do what it takes to consistently remember this God and the law that God gives. The New Testament reading continues with the book of Hebrews. And if you recall, the book of Hebrews has a lot to do with the nature of Jesus Christ, and especially in his role as the great high priest. And remember, a priest comes before God on behalf of the people, makes sacrifices before God on behalf of the people to make these people righteous before God. And that is what Jesus does. But the old great high priests, they would have to make a sacrifice on their behalf because they were sinful people as well. And they would have to make that sacrifice over and over again. But Jesus comes before God as our great high priest, as not having to make a sacrifice for himself, because Jesus never sinned, and as makes this once and for all sacrifice on the cross. And so then the writer of Hebrews then urges us then to persevere in our faith. And now this book transitions to Hebrews chapter 11, which is perhaps the most famous of all of the chapters of Hebrews. And it is a chapter about faith. What does it mean to persevere? And so Hebrews chapter 11 begins with this very famous verse. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the convictions of things not seen. And then it goes on to say, indeed, by faith our ancestors received approval. And chapter 11 goes on and tells this as kind of a hall of fame of those who have gone before us and lived lives of faith, and what it is that we can learn from them. Folks, we are now officially 1/4 of the way through this reading of the Bible in a 2-year period of time, because this is the 26th week. So, folks, thank you. Thank you for your perseverance. Thank you for your faithful reading of Scripture. that we may not only have a deepened knowledge of Scripture, but also that our faith in this God who gives us the Scripture may be deepened as well. Thank you.